So, hello everybody. I hope you're doing well and having a great day or evening or whatever the situation might be at your end. My name is Awad Ibrahim, and I am a professor at the University of Ottawa, Faculty of Education. I'm gonna raise my voice, of course, right? It would help. So my friend Maggie asked me to be provocative, so I'm gonna be as provocative as I can be. So I'm gonna start with inviting you to grab your coffee and listen to some of what I have to say. I do have the absolute pleasure of talking to you, actually, and very humbly so. And very modestly, I only have 3 points that I would like to make. One is I would like to introduce you to Martin Buber's idea of dialogue and relationship. That's the first thing. The second is then talk about what I call the economy of hospitality. And then eventually talk about, so we're going to move from top down, or from the broad to the specific. Then I'm going to build on those two ideas: Buber's idea of dialogue and relationship, the idea of economy of hospitality, and then talk about diversity and difference as a kind of a way to see how those two ideas feed into our conceptions. So I don't know if you know Martin Buber. If you don't, I highly recommend you having a look at his classic book, Between Man and Man. And probably he's writing for his own time, right? So there's a little bit of things have changed, and thank God that it's no longer just between man and man, and a woman and a woman, and man and a woman, and so we're talking about different ways of thinking about relationships and humanity. But nonetheless, Martin Buber has two ideas that I think are worth thinking about and engaging with. The first one is what he calls dialogue, and the second one is what he calls relationship. So there's some text that I'm going to read, and I apologize for doing that. It would help all of us to really get the gist of what Martin Buber is talking about. So concerning dialogue, Buber argues that there is no humanity without dialogue. There is no humanity without dialogue. The I, the self, and he writes the self with capital S, is an empty signifier without the other, capital O, or what he calls, and this is very significant articulation that you're going to see how it will feed into what I have to say. He doesn't call the other. He calls her thou, THOU, thou. Okay. For Buber, even though dialogue can take place in silence, language and communication are central to any form of dialogue. To be able to communicate in silence is, this is Buber talking, a human capacity that he calls communicating intersubjectively. That is outside language and outside the speech act. By way of explaining, Buber offers this example. Let's assume there are two women sitting beside one another. The first is disposed to receive and hear whatever comes along. The second, on the other hand, holds herself in reserve, withholds herself as a result. Something within the rigid woman cannot communicate itself until, and this is very significant, she releases in herself a reserve over which only she herself has the power. In this moment, communication, and this is Buber writing here, communication streams from her. Although in silence and in silence it directs itself to the other woman, only in this moment, as Buber would argue, in moments like these, can we deploy the term, and this is ultimately what I'm arguing for, the humanity or the dialogue becomes not just an act of relationship, but an act of love. So in order for a relationship and dialogue to move from just being simply a relationship between two individuals, as in just a simple act of relating to each other, but it becomes an act of love. I communicate with you because there is a humanity in you. There is something that I recognize in you, in simply being human being, by the way. So you're going to see how this idea trickles down. So in this sense, between the self and the other becomes a sacred, a representation of all humanity. The communication was indeed intended for the other who receives it. In this story between these two women, the word dialogue has happened, and very significantly, quote unquote, sacramentally. That is, when it is sacramental, dialogue is, in this sense, holistic. It is beyond language. We can almost name it. We can almost touch it. But as soon as we do that, as soon as we start to name it, as soon as we start to feel it, to touch it, it slips away. This is the space of what Buber calls awe, an overwhelming moment of pure feelings. Let me put it otherwise. Even though dialogue can exist outside the boundaries of language, i.e. through feelings and in general and in silence, that is in gesture and in silence, nonetheless communication is an essential component of dialogue. As an event, dialogue is deeply embedded in time and space. In this sense, Buber argues we need to distinguish between, and this is, I want you to emphasize this, dialogue and monologue. If two strangers, and this is, he gives this example, if two strangers exchange glances, what happens then? That reveals nothing but two people glancing at each other. There's not necessarily a dialogue. But for dialogue to take place, especially what he calls quote unquote genuine dialogue, it requires a quality of communication, or not just quality of communication, but quality of what he calls communion, a sense of time, place, and above all, a sense of recognizing the humanity of the other, that is moving from just simply a dialogue and relationship to a love, to moving dialogue and relationship to becoming an act of love. Buber makes distinction between what he calls three types of dialogue. One, genuine dialogue. This is where each of the participants really has in mind the other or others in their present and particular being, and runs to them with the intention of establishing a living mutual relationship between him or herself and them. So this is what he calls genuine dialogue. So I relate to you out of that. Second type of dialogue is what he calls technical dialogue. This is one which is prompted solely by the need of objective understanding. So I'm relating to you simply because I want to understand you. And you see this a lot in the at least classic notion of research. So we want to just go in a kind of almost colonial way. You go in and you simply get the information and then you leave. So this is the technical dialogue. The third dialogue, third type, is what he calls monologue disguised in dialogue. This is one in which two or more people meeting in space, speaking to each other with him or herself in strangely torturous ways, and yet imagine they have escaped the torment of being thrown back on their own resources. Um, Dialogue disguised as monologue, monologue disguised as dialogue, that's the process of echoing. I'm only hearing what on my own echo. So this forces us to think about both dialogue and relationship in a different way. This is what I call the I-thou ethical relationship. Okay, so to very simply put, and this is I'm gonna because of time, I'm gonna go really quickly to the main point. There are two types of dialogue, or two types of relationship, as Buber would argue. There is the I-it, I, capital I, dash it, capital I-T, or I dash thou, Thou. Okay, the I-it is where the other becomes something that is just an object. The I-thou is when you move from moving the other from simply an other to pure humanity, representative of pure humanity, and my relationship with the other in this sense becomes an act of love. So this is the ethics that I want us to think about. So this is what I call the I-thou ethical relationship. So this has an implication, this is my second point, into what I call the economy of hospitality. And what I'm calling the economy of hospitality is how we welcome people into our lives. Simply as human beings, but above all as teachers as well. How we welcome our students in our classroom. So the economy of hospitality has two ways of thinking about it. So I can either welcome people conditionally, and this is what I call the conditional hospitality. And here, I welcome people into my life, but I welcome them under certain conditions. So yes, you are welcome into my classroom. They are welcome into my house and my village and town and everything else, but under these conditions. Or the other type that I'm calling for is what I call the unconditional hospitality. And this is where we welcome people, such as what is happening right now in Ukraine. This is just an example, but in so many different African countries, and I don't know if people know that most of refugees are within the continent of Africa, and so they don't go to Europe, by the way. So let's drop this whole discussion about refugees coming to Europe. Most of refugees are within the continent of Africa in particular. So this is where we welcome people, and we don't even ask what their names are. We welcome them first. We give them hospitality. We give them houses. We give them food. And then we ask them what their names are and where they come from and why are they here and so on and so forth. This is what I'm calling the unconditional hospitality. So you could see that Buber is impacting directly this idea of unconditional hospitality. This leads me to, and this is the last point that I want to raise in this provocation, is the distinction that we need to make between diversity and difference. So diversity it falls under the conditional hospitality. Diversity is saying, let's welcome diverse people, but under certain conditions that we already set. So it becomes like almost a container. So there is an existing container, and diversity is put into within this container. Difference, on the other hand, is working with the unconditional hospitality on the one hand, but also with the I-thou ethical relationship. So here I recognize the difference that makes a difference. I recognize the difference that would recognize the other not just as an other, but as a representative of pure humanity. So in this sense, it becomes a thou, and that's ultimately what I'm calling for. I meant for this to be about 15 minutes, and I hope it will be. So there are 3 points that I raised. One is Martin Buber's idea of dialogue and relationship. Then I moved into the I thou. This is summed up into the I thou ethical relationship, and this impacts the type of economy that we end up creating, which in turn will impact the kind of policy, the kind of articulation that we put into practice. I'm calling for difference, not diversity, and recognition of difference. But it's not any difference, it's a difference that makes a difference, okay? So I hope you found it useful and provocative, and you still have your coffee with you, and I will see you around, and do stay safe, and let's pray that for a better humanity all around, one where we do not need to bomb each other, kill each other for absolutely nonsense, and where we, a world where we welcome each other with open arms, with love, and where we relate to each other within an I-thou ethical relationship. Ciao, everybody.